stipulated by customs to issue or identification, and also by the port operators. So when we step out in the first instance, we are clean, and we want to remain that way, and we ask that our the other stakeholders help us to do this. And you know, just in closing, is that we need to increase the efficiencies so in order to reduce corruption.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Mitzi Gordon-Green. Ladies and gentlemen, before we hear from Mr. Mark Gonzalez, the CEO of Mailpack, let me acknowledge the presence of Mr. John Mahfood, Vice President of the JMEA, and Mr. Mark Shields, who is representing the Security and Justice Committee of the PSOJ. Welcome, gentlemen. Mr. Gonzalez, we'll now hear from you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Madam Commissioner and team, and members of the panel. Good morning. As you heard, I'm Mark Gonzalez. My colleague Shipme did a roll call, but I'm declaring that Mailpack is the #1 and the biggest e-commerce courier in Jamaica. You agree with me, sir? Thank you.
We won't charge for the advertisement, because since we invited both of you here.
I'm with Mailpack for 16, almost 17 years now. And from my experience, I've realized that what we need in terms of fighting corruption is that it ought to be attacked from a cultural standpoint. We are from a society that believes that we should not pay. We want the microwave approach. It must be instant. And so you find that people and our clients will develop ways of trying to, what we term it as, beat the system. So you want a link, you want to get your item instantly, and you don't want to pay. And that is the biggest challenge. The minimis would have been raised to $50. And what we are seeing, every single invoice that we receive is $49.99. And that poses a challenge for us. So you have delays in clearing, because when you declare a value, the officer, with technology nowadays, especially the stuff's coming from Amazon, you can use your smartphone, you scan the barcode, and the price is right there. So, but the client is sending an invoice to us for $49.99. When you scan it, it's for $199.99. And so, how do you stem this systemic problem? How do you rid the culture of corruption? And sometimes we put it onto the wrong persons. If the external party is the one that would approach in most instances. And so we need a radical change of our belief system, and it is going to be a collaboration with all the stakeholders. Our business, chiefly the e-commerce sector, we facilitate, I would say, household items. It's not much of a commercial nature, so our experience would be different from the large movers in terms of persons who would use a seaport. It is, when you look at our shipment, 95% would include clothing, shoes, and more recently, everybody want the Brazilian hair or something. And so you find that we need to develop a system whereby from provider to customer, through to customs, border protection, etc., a seamless process is developed. And with technology, everything can be linked. And I do believe that if we put our minds to it, then more than likely we can reduce. Might not be able to eliminate the, immediately, but it is a process, and we can reduce the level of corruption in our country. I won't bore you, but if you have other questions later on, then of course I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. We'll now hear from Mrs. Pickersgill. The Port Authority is a central player in terminal operations and port operations in Jamaica. It cuts across cruise shipping and commercial ports and private ports and all of that. And so it'll be interesting to hear the Port Authority's view on how we can maintain integrity in the supply chain and in the cross-border movement of cargo and people as it relates to cruise shipping.
Mr. Master of Ceremonies, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. The Port Authority is indeed happy and feel privileged to be a part of this discussion, which is long overdue. Corporate discussion on corruption. I applaud the Commissioner of Customs and the Customs team for the decision to take their rightful place as leaders against the fight against corruption. Because normally we think that corruption is a ingrowing, it's a youth thing. We now seeing that it's not only locally grown, it's internationally imported, and Customs as border protection agency stands at the forefront. The Port Authority of Jamaica is responsible for and has been known to develop and regulate world-class port and port facilities. Therefore, we have always had an interest in protecting our walls. Customs has now taken leadership and stands with us in not only defending the walls, but the borders. The terminal operators stand as backative with us, and in recent times, that backative has gotten even more powerful through collaboration. The players in the industry and in the supply chain, the truckers, consignees, shippers, we have been seeking a way for us all to be integrated and for us all to stand as one in the fight against corruption. The Port Authority in those days, now we can say we are living in the best of times and still the worst of times. We have heard about the increase in international trade, those trillion-dollar figures. And Mr. Stevenson mentioned just now that in one country, there was a tripling of corruption. And the issue was whether it was the increase in trade or the softness of borders that caused this. In Jamaica, the best of times, we have been experiencing growth, but we have also been experiencing increasing corruption. As the Master of Ceremonies mentioned, our corruption indices show this increase. The governance indices show that the corruption, graft, and greed has increased tremendously. The Port Authority, in the early times when we thought it was the worst of times, we stepped up and developed the Port Bustamante security regulations, whereby we figure if that we approve all persons entering the ports to do business, the shippers, the truckers, etc., then we could all police each other. Later on, we developed the Port Bustamante security regulations. The Port Authority, along with all of us here, consignees, shippers, etc., invested heavily in scanning equipment, in surveillance equipment, and still, when we thought we had it all right, those who were intent on bringing the system down showed us we had it all wrong. Those cameras see what the individuals manning them wanted to see, and therefore there was still drugs and guns passing over the port. As they say, good laws do good. Good men do better. And therefore, in this fight against corruption, a speaker mentioned our integrity and how we deal with that. Another person said that we need all, and this is my words, to be informers. In Jamaica, there's a culture, it's still there, of the informer for dead. And therefore, if you see, you do not tell. And therefore, we have to find a system in which we can get people to tell, and if not, then we may have to force them to tell and to develop this culture of telling. The Port Authority stands ready, willing, and able to defend our walls. We welcome the collaboration with Customs, which has been stepped up a notch, to stand behind us to defend our borders. The support of the terminal operators is most welcome. We ask for all the other players in the industry to stand with us. We have laws that we can enforce, but we'll also, with all the players, try to have forums such as this where we educate each other on, as it was said here, the cost of corruption, not to those people over there, but to all of us, so that we can find a way to stem this scourge. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Pickersgill. Ladies and gentlemen, the Jamaica Customs team is understandably well represented on this panel. And we'll hear briefly from our Senior Director Legal, because one of the things the Commissioner would have mentioned earlier is the work that has been done in terms of the legislation. And that work is not yet complete. So the Senior Director of Legal maybe can tell us the work that is happening there briefly and how that will impact the supply chain and what we're seeking to do in terms of accountability and transparency.
Thank you, Kingsley. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. With respect to the customs legislation, indeed, the Commissioner indicated that one of the efforts that's been made by Jamaica Customs to address the issue of corruption has to do with implementing a modern customs legislation. And indeed, Mitzi alluded to it as well when she mentioned that it is important for persons to understand the customs laws. And when the procedures are very clear and transparent, then persons, any gaps, as it were, any loopholes will be closed. And persons will know very clearly what it is that the law requires of them, and so they don't need to seek a bly or need to have a link in order to have their business dealt with. And so for the past, I would say years, because it really has been a project that has taken several years, but certainly in the last few months, there has been a strong drive to develop a new customs legislation. In fact, the Customs Act 2019 was tabled in Parliament in June of this year. And that is the first phase of what has been very strong collaboration between Jamaica Customs and our various partners. There has been robust discussion. Our partners have let us know quite vocally and importantly what their needs are and what they would like the legislation to look like. And Jamaica Customs has listened, and we have sought to put in place a framework that will modernize our customs processes, not only with a view to ensuring that those processes are clear for our external stakeholders, but importantly, that our officers are very clear as to what their responsibilities are, and importantly, what their obligations are under the legislation. We are moving into another phase with respect to the legislation, and it has to do with the development of regulations and rules. And what this phase is intended to do is set out very clearly what it is that persons will be required to do when it is that they are seeking to have their goods cleared through customs. So the regulations will, of course, be promulgated by the minister, and then there will be even more detailed rules that will be developed by the commissioner and published. And so once again, the aim of the entire process is to ensure that the rules are very clear and continuing to engage with our partners in developing those principles so that Jamaica Customs is being responsive to the various needs of the trade. The Commissioner had also indicated that one of the key efforts to stem corruption has to do with collaboration with various partners. And the legislation sets out a broad framework for that. So it allows, of course, for Jamaica Customs to enter into information and intelligence sharing memoranda of understanding with various partners, locally and internationally. And this will, of course, put us in a unique position to have information, exchange information with our partners that will allow us to deal with any issues of corruption. And of course, having clear rules means that when there are infractions by our own internal personnel, that we have internal disciplinary mechanisms in place to deal with those instances of infractions. And of course, we want to ensure that persons, and the Commissioner had mentioned it, persons have the opportunity to report the information that they may have. They may observe something. And a number of the panelists alluded to it, or informative for dead culture. The fact that if we see acts of corruption and we don't make a report, then we're in fact being participants, right? We're collaborators, we're accomplices, as it were, by turning a blind eye. So we want to ensure that we have the framework. There are other pieces of legislation that already exist that provide for that. And the role of the Legal Affairs Unit is to ensure that we support the other units, our Internal Affairs Unit or Investigations Unit, in looking into any allegations of wrongdoing and ensure that we're dealing with them either through internal disciplinary mechanisms or prosecution in the courts, and certainly liaising with our partners such as the Jamaica Constabulary Force in bringing these matters to their attention so that they can be dealt with.
Thank you, Ms. Edwards. Ladies and gentlemen, audit is an important part of maintaining integrity in the supply chain. And so this morning we'll hear briefly from Mrs. Toller Walker, who is the director in charge of central operations, and an important part of that is post-clearance audit.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. As was said before, I'm Janice Walker. I'm the director for the post-clearance Authorized Economic Operator AEO and Incentives Unit. As part of the WCO, which Jamaica Customs is a member of, World Customs Organization, our aim is to ensure that we remain a modern customs entity. And as such, we move forward in this 21st century, doing things and keeping up with standards that are set by the World Customs Organization. Post-clearance audit is something that is necessary in this 21st century. We do not want to have importers at the ports for extended period. And so, where goods can be released and an audit conducted afterwards, that's where we fall in place, right? Now, I'm very pleased to see Mr. Allen here, as he's one of our authorized economic operators, and we work closely with him. It is important that as custom entities, we recognize that the safe framework of standards is very important in our whatever we have to do. And so there are 3 pillars that we work with that is very important: customs to customs, customs to business, and customs to government. Customs to business is crucial, and hence this agency took it on themselves to ensure that we implemented the Authorized Economic Operator Program, which is very important to us, because we have to recognize that within our spheres, there are persons who we classify as high risk and some are low risk. And so those that are low risk, we have to ensure that we give them that status of being low risk and then focus our resources on our high risk importers. our authorized economic operators, we have to ensure that, as it says, customs to business, that partnership is where our private sector committee come into place. Mr. Allen, who is the president of that committee, works closely with us. It is important that as we are here this morning, we recognize that working closely with our partners is one of the things that will strengthen the integrity in the supply chain. Because if we don't work closely with our partners, we won't achieve that. Hence the importance of having that in place, right? Our aim here this morning is to ensure that where we have our partners together, we listen to them, we get feedback from them, and so it helps us to know what we are to do further, and it helps them to know that we are open and they can come and speak with us. As a member of this panel, it is important that as a director, I also recognize that the team that I work with, or closely, we have to work with our importers to ensure that they have that trust in us and we have that trust in them. And so as we work together this morning and going forward, we will ensure that the mantra of the Jamaica Customs Agency is held high. If there are any further questions, I'm free to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Walker. Ladies and gentlemen, there are officers of Jamaica Customs who are on the front line at the major ports every day. And as we move closer to what we call traditionally the busy season, it only gets more intense. But Ms. Baker is the director who is in charge of that team that is on the front line. And so she can share from her experience what are some of the challenges and the focus in terms of integrity issues on the main ports.
Thank you, Kingsley. Good morning, everyone. As Mr. Henry introduced prior, my name is Janice Baker. I'm the director for Marine Wharves in Kingston, and that operation includes Kingston Wharves, Kingston Freeport Terminal Limited, the Sufferance Wharves, Kingston Logistics Center. But to put that in English and for persons to understand simply, if you're coming to clear a barrel, if you're coming to clear your commercial cargo, that is where you will show up, right? And so you will imagine that there's a perception that the corruption is more frequent in those areas. And so as the director for the team in that operation, the focus really is ensuring that we have clear operating procedures. Where the operating procedures are clear, where they are communicated to each staff member, and everybody knows what is required, then the risk of having any opportunity for corrupt activities to take place will be greatly reduced. And so our focus on the ground is to ensure that our operating procedures are clear and every single member of the team is aware of what those procedures are. The second thing is to ensure that the management and the supervisory capacity on the ground is strengthened through constant training, team building activities, and just to ensure that the team can give good guidance and that the members who they are leading are comfortable with that kind of leadership that the team is providing. The policies and requirements and so on that the trading public needs to know, information, has to be out there, and I know that the agency has done a very good job in doing our customs meet the community, radio and media clips here and there, informing the trading public of what is required. If it is that you're coming to clear a barrel, if you're coming to clear a box, if you're importing goods for charity, and so on. So once the importer has the knowledge, then it will reduce the likelihood of any corrupt activity taking place because you'll be aware of what is required, and so the customs officer cannot tell you otherwise. Where there are instances of reports of infractions or so on, they are promptly investigated. Actions are promptly taken to ensure that the occurrence does not reoccur, or the person might be removed from that direct area to facilitate an investigation. So once a report is made, it is taken seriously, and we have other internal partners within the agency who will come in to ensure that those investigations take place. But more importantly, I'd like to point out something that Mr. Gonzalez said and others would have said earlier, that this is a collective effort. And so it is important that our importers, the rest of the supply chain, are truthful in their declarations to customs. And so we talk about under-invoicing. And so you must declare your true values. And when you do that, that will minimize the likelihood of that environment being there that is conducive for corrupt activity to take place. And so it is a partnership, and we encourage persons to be truthful in your declarations, to be truthful in your interactions with us. And so the likelihood of any corrupt activity will be greatly minimized. And we're coming on to our busy season. I know that the agency usually ramps up its communication, and so information will be passed on to the public as to what is required. And there are other programs also that we're putting in place to minimize customers coming in to interact and to spend long hours to come and clear your barrels and so on. So as we continue this discussion, if there are other questions, then I'm available to assist in answering. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Baker. Ladies and gentlemen, as you were informed earlier, we are being streamed live via JIS TV and JIS social media platform. And I'm going to take a comment from Mr. Allen, and then we will go to a comment and a question via Facebook, and then we will open up for questions from the floor. Mr. Allen?
Thank you. Sorry about that. Thank you very much. The word partnership comes up, and the issue of corruption is the topic of the day, and integrity. I want to just mention briefly. In our business, at Derrimon Trading Company Limited, Sam Paras Cash and Carry, and as president of the PSC and the AOE program, one of the easiest and the best way to avoid corruption in our business is to become certified on the AOE program. It makes things so much easier. I just want to spend a minute on that. Our business has improved significantly. We have had very little difficulty getting our goods into our space, thanks to custom and particularly the AOE administrators. It's a very good program. We have seen a growth over the last year or two. I mean, when we came on board, we were the 10th company on board, and now we are almost up to 180, if my memory serves me correctly. What that does is give you a express line, if I may say, Madam Commissioner, an express line to get your product in without all of these, what do you call them, third party and these con men and all these things that some persons treat to engage in. It makes things so much easier. So I'm just trying to emphasize that, and thanks to you.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. As I told you, we have a question and a comment from our online viewer. So Sonia Ellis on Facebook is asking, are packages open and recorded in joint custody? And I guess that is a question that can be taken by either Mailpack or ShipMe, and it's also a question on the port side, shipping side, that can be answered, because I think the question applies to both.
I'll take the question, and the answer to that is yes. Once the package is being examined locally, and that is done under the supervision of customs. And
that is generally how it is across the board. Of course, there are exemptions, as we're saying, in terms of the AEO, where everything is not examined because there's a stringent security program that is in place throughout the entire supply chain. But generally, yes, there's joint inspection. Customs is there, the importer is there, or the importer's representative is there. Also coming from online is a comment from Donovan Richards. And Mr. Richards says, good morning. Jamaica, it is good to hear that we are attempting to reduce corruption in Jamaica. It is a cultural problem. It's sucking the life out of Jamaica. We can do it. We must do it for the betterment of the country. All right, so that is a comment from Mr. Donovan Richards via our online media. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to throw it open at this time for any questions from the members of the audience. There are microphones, 2 of them on the floor, and so if you have questions, we invite you now to pose those questions to members of the panel. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jocelyn Hamilton, and Tamika Lindsay and I are here representing consumer packaging. I've listened carefully and I am very impressed by what has been done. And I'd like to say it's a pleasure to see Mr. Allen again. Someone once told me that integrity is very important, and I think it's true. I really do believe that. And integrity, he says, applies in many different areas. For example, if something is not working, he says, it has no integrity, and we don't trust it. So the tables and the chairs you're sitting on, they have integrity, and you trust it. That's why you're sitting on it. You didn't test it to see if it's firm enough to hold our body weights. But I do believe also that in order to help our country to stem corruption, it needs to be taught in the family. That's the first and foremost important organization, the family. I am, however, suggesting, is there a way that we can engage the government to teach this principle of corruption, integrity, and honesty in schools? If we are able to do that, and I'm not saying that in introducing it to schools in our curriculums, it will eliminate, but it will help. So I am suggesting that we engage the government in teaching the principles of honesty and integrity in schools. I also wear the hat of the opportunity of working with Roots 96.1. And I recently had the Jamaica folk singers in studio with me. And I discovered that the songs that we embrace, the folk songs, they have a lot of principles in it, how to deal with life. So our music plays a very important part in how we nurture our society. And these are some of the things that we might have to look at in teaching our society. It's a behavior pattern that we have learned, and I've heard it from the panel that it's the culture, it's a new culture. What we need to do now is to unlearn these things, and we have to find a way. And I think the most important way, in my opinion, my perspective, is to try to get the family to understand these principles and to introduce it into schools. And that's what I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you. That is a solid point, and I don't think anybody here will contest that, because integrity is an issue of value, and value, as you say, is something that is taught in the home, but certainly can also be taught in schools and reinforced. So that's a point that is well taken. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a couple of questions. Our online viewers are tuned in. A question from Twitter, on Twitter, is where does the cash go when it is confiscated? And I guess that question is one that is concerned about whether when cash is confiscated, if it is secured or it is left up to the whims and fancies of those of us who are involved in the business of confiscating cash. Ms. Edwards, I believe that is a question that you may want to take.
Well, the Jamaica Customs Agency does from time to time, as that question would indicate, confiscate or seize cash. We have very robust internal procedures in terms of how the cash will be treated. Certainly, this is not cash that officers have at their disposal that they can dip into at their whim and fancy. Not at all. There's a very clear process for how the cash is secured. And in the case where the cash is seized under the Proceeds of Crime Act, then the cash is actually transferred, again, through a secured armed courier to the bank where it is deposited in an interest-bearing account. And so if for any reason it is necessary for Jamaica Customs to return the cash to the individual from whom it was seized or to any other party who may have a legitimate claim to the cash, then the cash would be returned with interest that would have accrued. Of course, once we have seized the cash, we wouldn't have seized it unless we had good reason to do so. The officer must have seen something or heard something in terms of the exchanges with the person who has possession of the cash that would make him feel that there has either been some breach of the Customs Act or the Proceeds of Crime Act. And once, of course, we have completed our investigations into the matter, and we always give persons an opportunity to give us information so that we can be satisfied that indeed the cash is from a legitimate source or is intended for legitimate activities. Of course, if we have looked at all the circumstances and we are satisfied that perhaps the cash is one that is cash that is subject to the Proceeds of Crime Act, then we will commence proceedings in the court, civil proceedings, to have the cash forfeited to the Crown. Again, I wish to reiterate that the focus of any such court proceedings is to target illegitimate cash, not to take away legitimate funds that persons will have in their possession. And so once again, even when we have commenced the court proceedings, it is still possible for that individual or any third party to give us the information so that we can be satisfied that indeed these are legitimate funds. And once we're so satisfied, even if we've started the court process, we will discontinue and return the funds to the person who is properly entitled. But of course, if we don't have that information, then the matter goes through the court process. The court will make an order for forfeiture, and the money goes into the consolidated fund. So Jamaica Customs doesn't get it, but the consolidated fund will receive the cash. I want to take the opportunity to just emphasize that the Proceeds of Crime Act requires that persons who are leaving Jamaica or entering Jamaica are required to declare cash or monetary instruments that are in excess of United States $10,000 or its equivalent. Very important for persons to bear in mind that obligation. And so once you are leaving or you're entering, make that declaration. You need not fear that if you've declared it, we will take the cash. Again, the goal is not to take away legitimate cash, but we recognize that persons are oftentimes moving illicit funds as part of drug trafficking, organized crime, and other types of illicit activities. So that is the process in a nutshell.
Thank you, Ms. Edwards. We have a question on the floor.
Thank you, Kingsley. I just want to speak a little on the gentleman who spoke not too long ago about dishonesty and, for it to be taught in schools. I tend to agree with him. I will tell you why. I can remember at about 5 or 6 years old, I took a 5 cents from my mother's purse. And 5 cents that time was a lot of money. And I got a fine beating. And she said something to me that I didn't understand as a child, but I understand it clearly now. She said to me, the greatest crime that men have done has grown from small and distant spring. I didn't understand then, but I know now. If you take 5 cents today, you take 10 cents tomorrow, and then you continue until you become a full-fledged criminal. So I agree with you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Manahan. We have another question.
Yes, morning, Mr. MC. I am Clive Cook. I'm a licensed custom broker, and I'm also a member of the Custom Brokers and Freight Forwarders Association. I can say with certainty, as a custom broker who has been practicing for well over 20 years, that the JIS is to be applauded for its effort against corruption. We have seen it in automation of processes, several establishment of several internal units, the risk management unit. I am not sure if their efforts have been communicated strongly enough to the public. I know there's the Meet the Community program and the likes, but maybe more can be done to engage the public and have them really understand that the issue of corruption is not an issue of the JCA, but it is really an issue of Jamaica, and really to have additional persons and other stakeholders who are on the ports. Stephen Doors, we hear about the issue with drugs and arms and the port. So I think more can be done in terms of engaging those stakeholders and really having them know that the effort is not just one of the JCA, but it is a Jamaica and stakeholders issue. But I want to mention as a challenge that I see with the JCA, and the commissioner may have stepped out, is one of efficiency. Because for me, inefficiencies provide that breeding ground for corruption. If an importer makes a honest declaration and is able to get through customs, I mean, my friend Mr. Allen would not have that issue being on the AEO program, but there are several other smaller entities and new businesses who would not be on the AEO program. We need to see, I noticed my friend Mr. Derek Ross, he operates a warehouse, and I know he has a program which captures when the customer comes in, how soon his warehouse persons locate the cargo, and so on. The question for me, maybe the director can answer, is what happens when these inefficiencies are captured by customs? How is it dealt with? Because this for me is really, it cannot be overstated as how inefficiencies really fosters the part of the corruption that we face on the wharf. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask Mr. Allen has asked to jump in, and I'm sure the commissioner may have something to say in regards to your comments as well.
Thank you very much. I think that all of us in this room have read, have researched, we know everything that we need to know about corruption. So I want to drive us a little forward, if I can, for a minute, on some things that we need to do. Internationally, the research also produce support as to how we can approach these things, but I'm going to be very, very simplistic, picking up a cue from some of my colleagues. Beginning with ourselves at the AOE and the PSC. I'm going to suggest to the custom agency that they take this program, whether in a smaller format or not, into the schools. And I am going to suggest to my membership that we allow ourselves to form a team to get into the business community, small or large, to speak not only on the subject of having technical security apparatus to provide security for the supply chain, but the importance of finding people who are of a certain caliber, I mean morally speaking. Kind of hard to do, but then somebody mentioned earlier, fingerprint, you do police record, which is one approach, but there are many other such approaches, proper background check, etc., etc. We need to get to a point where we find people in our businesses, and I'm sure I don't want to put word in custom mouth to make things more difficult for some of us in the business, in the export business and import business. But quite frankly, I would suggest we had to that program, apart from counterterrorism and all these other things, the issue of corruption. Put it on there. So part of the lecturing, apart from all that I've said before, should include corruption, if I suggest. I am going to promote that within our membership, but I'm suggesting to custom, place it front and center as a part of the requirement to qualify to become a member of the AOE program. The issue of corruption must be placed on the agenda like anywhere else. That's what I'm suggesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Commissioner?
Thank you, Kingsley. And thanks to the members here again. Let me first mention regarding Mr. Jocelyn Hamilton from Consumer Packaging, and you said Roots 96. That indeed, even based on what Mr. Allen spoke of in terms of taking this to our citizenry, the youths of Jamaica, that it is indeed important. And that's one of the approaches that the agency also has in the pipeline. We are also looking at engaging at the university, the tertiary levels, but also looking at the secondary and primary level to engage them in customs, the role and function, their understanding, upgrading their understanding, and also ensuring that they have a good understanding of what integrity means to them and what integrity means to us and the country. As it relates to GOJ, there is a values and attitude program that is also on stream, and the Jamaica Customs will be a part of that, because we do understand that this is a cultural issue and not just something that we should look at just from customs perspective. Now to you, Mr. Coke, Clive Coke, my friend. I want to also say to you that when we look at inefficiencies, it is something that we looked at keenly within the agencies, but also recognizing that work in progress. And so we continue to try to get it right, but make no excuses until we put the necessary steps in place to speak to those inefficiencies and address them. But I also want you to know that as a key player in the process, that we also look within our own entities, because the inefficiencies are around the respective players. And we want to make sure that it is not about blame game, but indeed it's about accountability and taking the necessary responsibility so that we can make the necessary changes. So we continue to review our processes, and we continue to address what needs to address as we go along. The issue with customs and trade is that it is so dynamic, And there are a lot of things that continues to change as we move along. And because it is not static and because it is dynamic, you know, we have to ensure that we are adapting and changing accordingly. Your colleague, Mitzi, speak towards, you know, processes and the alignment of processes across the various units and regions. You know, what is said a lot of time is that certain things that happens in Kingston doesn't necessarily happen in Montego Bay. And yes, with all honesty, yes, that does happen from time to time. But automation within that space has helped us. And as a result of our own customs automated system, what we call a Secuda World, that it has helped in the standardization of what we do. And so we continue to push and build out on that so that we have the levels and layers of standardization required so that we continue to serve you. But bearing in mind that in the midst of the automation is the people. And sometimes we make our own rules. And so it is important that the supervision, the management is there to ensure that when there are outliers, that we can bring them back to where they ought to be, and so that we can continue to effectively serve. But where you have issues, you know the channels to route it through so that we can work together to solve them. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. As we take another question from a member of the audience, I'm asking that as you come to ask your question or to make a comment, that you would introduce yourself so that we know who you are. Thank you. We'll take your question.
Good afternoon, everyone, or is it still morning? My name is Raquel Allen. I represent Microsoft. I'm an outsider of this forum. However, as a Microsoft member, we do work with vendors who have to, adhere to the import and exportation laws for software licenses and the likes, right? The question I wanted to raise today has to do with, and I'm glad the Commissioner raised it, automation and the leveraging of technology across the stakeholders, resources, and the players in this field. We know that people and the integrity of people is built on ethics and morals and values, and you guys have spoken on that in different segments as we went across SHICME and the competitive mail pack and all of the associations you guys are putting in place. But someone else mentioned starting in the schools, and I was saying to Mr. Shields, that ethics used to be something that was instilled in our schools years before I was born. And I think if we were to layer and draw that back in, my dad would be happy to know that it is something that will help with what you guys are bringing on board here. Integrity, morals, and values is something that helps. Confidentiality and trust was also mentioned. We talk about persons being honest and declaring evidence or sightings of corruption. They themselves are afraid because at the end of the day, when I speak of something I've witnessed, I myself now become under threat because I may feel that that said person who I've trusted in will take my trust and, of course, go away with misusing that trust. How do we ensure against this? I know we have persons who would like to say that I have the integrity to do that, but with the legislations, with the policies, the governance, and the procedures, technology is important. Secuda is only a step in that stone, right, or stepping stone in that place. How is it being integrated? How is it being supported? How is it being, what is the governance and the mechanism behind this? And to have the forefront runners like myself, who I buy things on Amazon. I use ShipMe, I also use MailPack. Sometimes I use the regular post office, right? How are all these players coming back into the technology? How is automation going to drive this process as we look to go in towards the CARICOM hub? We are a growing community. Jamaica is a big player in this field. And while you are all playing your parts in it, I think I have not heard a specific harp, although we know technology is man by man. How is that going to be the forerunner as we go into automation and ensuring inefficiencies are addressed properly? That's my question, and feel free to answer.
So thank you, Ms. Allen. And I think several panelists may want to jump in on this. How do we leverage technology to improve systems and to maintain integrity, but also how do we leverage technology for greater interaction and integration amongst the various players and ensure that there is a level of integrity with the users of those technologies as well. So we'll take anybody who wants to jump in at that, just jump in at will.
Mr. Chairman, with respect to technology, the Port Authority and Customs have partnered in the systems that, at least electronic systems to date, that is ASICUDA, and the Port Authority has a port community system which deals with business to business. Right now we are in the process of agreeing with the trade, players in the trade, about the sharing of information in a confidential manner. We are looking at having an MOU with all the players in that regard. We are trying to secure the information that we receive and to ensure that the information we receive and is transmitted and communicated electronically is confidential, trusted, and true.
Thank you, Mrs. Pickersgill. Commissioner?
So, having regard to technology for customs being an enabler, for greater efficiency, there was a time in customs, and the brokers can speak to that, when in the submission of their customs declaration, import or export, that was a lengthy process. That was a manual process. And now we are in a space where that is an online process. We are at a time where we are so accustomed to things happening in so many days, so many hours, that when it is now happening in 10 minutes, 15 minutes, we say, wow, but it can be even better. So for us and for me as a commissioner, what pleases me is the appetite that the Jamaica Customs Agency has for technology, for automations, for digitalization, so that we can advance in everything we do. Now we look at technology in the customs operation, but also as it were in terms of corporate services, because we're looking at it in the entire enterprise-wide customs for greater efficiency. And it is efficiency, ladies and gentlemen, and greater efficiency that will reduce this plague that we call corruption. But even the system, the integrity of the system is important. And so it is important that we have good ICT governance, good policies, good assurances in moving forward. And so because of that, the policy structure must be in place. The audit of these systems must be in place. But also, what is good in terms of to drive the continuous efficiency is the integration and the links. And when I say links, I mean that in the most positive term, ladies and gentlemen, between the systems, so that they are able to speak and connect and create this interface that limits manipulation. So by right, it would be the ideal for the terminal operating systems, be it Kingston Wharves, be it the Kingston Freeport Terminal Limited, be speaking into the customs system, as well as there are, I'm sure, connectivity between the port community system. So we continue to improve, and we're working together as a community to ensure that happens. But unfortunately, it's not overnight. It takes time. And importantly, it takes financial resources. All right? So it's something that is being worked on. Thank you.
I just come in. I have a question for Commissioner. Not this part, head table. I want her to spend a minute on the issue of sanctions. Because again, I keep going back there because it's very, very, it's an important subject for us in the business sector. too many crimes go unpunished, including corruption. And I want to just say a quick thing. When you look at the whole subject of corruption, and my good friend Mr. Mark Shees will tell you, and others, that there are some other aspect of corruption that could be, not a lawyer here, there's a legal man here, can guide me, could be prosecuted before you find all the evidence to support the act itself of corruption. And if I'm wrong, somebody needs to correct me from all my research. So we say somebody is alleged to be involved with corruption. But when you look at it, there could be a fraud someplace or a bribery, which is from my information, a direct illegal act that is can be prosecuted or can be arrested for. So for me, there's two matters that I want to end my presentation with, unless I get a chance to speak before we close. One is I go back to it, personal responsibility, and two is sanction. So I'd like to hear the commissioner, if I may, even at the table on the sanction issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to jump in on, any other panelists wish to jump in on the question of how we are leveraging technology?
Yeah, sure, I'll jump in on that. Kamal Clark shaped me. Technology, for me, plays a very important role. The visibility that it presents allows our company to investigate matters that we would not otherwise be able to investigate beyond paperwork. And for us, integrating a system with a camera system helps us, because even though a manifest may be presented, the item on the manifest or what is actually inside of the package is problematic. And the only way to actually see what is in the package is to leverage the camera system with an accountable software system. So, for instance, even though, yes, a shipme representative and a customs representative may look at a package, there's no guarantee that what has been presented by both parties is actually what is in the package. So the only way to do that is to have a third-party surveillance system, and that's where, for us, our warehouse comes into play. In, for instance, Miami, our camera system is integrated into our software system, so we can see physically what comes to the warehouse, when it comes, when the inspection process is being done in the state, we know. Similarly, in Kingston, when a package is being collected, if somebody has to open the package, we can see what is in the package at that point. However, we didn't have that visibility at customs or at the warehouse, the bonded facility that we are currently operating out of, and that presents challenges. ASICUDA has been very good to provide additional information, but bear in mind that the facilities that are present at the airport have not yet caught up, and that was what required us to actually go and make that investment in the actual warehouse facility. So it's marrying the technology in terms of hardware, the technology in terms of the software, but also the actual facility. The design of the facility, how goods flow through the facility is very important, and how everything mates together is critical for us, and that's, you know, where we are at this point. I don't know if Mark wants to jump in on that.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Mr. Gonzalez.
Well, I'm just, because I'm invited by Shipme, I'm just saying that, yes, we do have a similar operation whereby if there is doubt, we can draw on images from our Miami operations. A matter of fact, they operate the warehouse which we partner with, our partner Aeropost. It's a bonded warehouse, and it is monitored by the US Customs. And so certain requirements are set out, and of course, images are captured. Each package is opened, the image is captured, and then if there is doubt at a later date or so, we can draw on that technology. And there are others in terms of linkages with the external courier. I could get a tracking number from a DHL FedEx input it in my system, and it brings up everything. So there is an intertwine there with various systems. Of course, we can improve, and of course, that too, we can collaborate with customs in terms of our technology outreach.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. I realize that we have two persons on the floor waiting to ask questions, but I also realize that members of the panel are also still interested in jumping in on the technology question. So we take Mrs. You want to answer Mr. Allen's question, but Mrs. Burt Green want to chime in, and then we go to the commissioner.
Thank you. As it relates to the technology, just taking it a little bit wider, as the commissioner said, we have ASICUDA, and before that, lodging a customs declaration was a task. But we have ASICUDA, we have PCS, as Ms. Pickers-Gibbs mentioned. We also have the Jamaica Trade Information Portal, and coming on stream soon, which we're looking forward to as well, is the Jamaica Single Window, which will allow us to submit application for import permits, whether it be for the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Agriculture, in just one location. And I think that will be significant for us as well. Now, as custom brokers, our lives have gotten a little bit easier as it relates to ASICUDA and PCS, but like customs, we have an appetite for more, and customs have heard from us on the areas that we want, some improvement on. So as it gets easier, as custom gives us more, we're greedy and we will want more, and in the end, it will only make our clearance process better.
Thank you. Commissioner?
Yes, just to answer Mr. Allen's question, and I think it is in reference to sanctions. And for us to reach the sanctions, there must be an infraction or a breach. And, pardon? Oh, okay. So there must be an infraction or a breach. And so for the agency, as it's looking at it from an internal standpoint, if it is that a staff member, an employee, a team member did not apply or the right rules, policies, and procedures, then normally there is a procedure that is in place for that. Also take in mind the JIS staff orders, the public service regulations that we have to apply, and our own, as an agency, rules, regulations, policy, and procedures. So any breach of that, there's an internal procedure that treats with that. Normally, as it relates to sanction based on the disciplinary procedure, then it would mean, first and foremost, a staff being rotated from that area to allow for the investigative process to follow, and quite possibly it may also lead to the person being removed from work for a period of time until we have been satisfied that the outcome is one that is fair and correct. When we do an investigation, it is to investigate the facts. And so the person, the team member, might be in a position where we found that the case against him or her is not one that is dangerous or something that we would need further investigation on. Also, as it relates to, on the other side, the importing and the exporting public, where there's a breach, a lot of us are familiar with certain parts of the Customs Act. And we love to speak about Section 209, Section 210, and 211. I'm not sure if with the new bill, if those sections are the same. However, there are strict procedures to treat it with that. And as it relates to that, our importer, throughout their brokers, sometimes will receive letters outlining what the breach process entails and what the fines and sanctions are. Normally, as it is now, it is normally three times the value, right? So, and sometimes because of that, it might seem very high, but know that the Jamaica Customs Agency is an agency empowered by government to enforce the laws of Jamaica, and a part of the law is those breach procedures that are there. Now, we also taking a different view as it relates to our different approach, because we tend to want to investigate when something happens. But we have moved the scenario in a way where we are putting the information out there before. So what we're doing is engaging, building awareness and sensitization, not just to our internal members, but also to our external stakeholders. Because it is through the sensitization and awareness, these education campaign, that persons will have a greater understanding of what is required for compliance so that we can minimize these occurrences from happening. And as a result of that, we want and have been creating a mechanism, a channel for persons to speak to us about corruption, right? There is the online facility that we have, which is our customer relationship form, that you can go online and provide us with any information. And that information is held in the strictest confidence. I know when we speak of confidence, you know, some of us get very nervous. But if you can hold me to that, I would love for you to hold me to that. Because we need the information. We need the information so that we can get it right. We can be better to serve you in the best way possible. So we continue to do that. We have our internal affairs unit, that unit is charged to investigate internal allegations against our team members, right? So, and also it is also taken outside. There's also the Revenue Protection Division, who has a responsibility to protect the government's revenue, and so has a wider mandate, you know, even as it relates to investigation. So there are various mechanisms, and we continue to look at the best approach as we take the bold step. There was a time when, for us, this word, corruption, is a taboo. We are being bold. We are taking the approach where we're saying to you, we want to know how we can greater do the right thing to serve you. And so it is a collaboration, and we are encouraging you as partners to help us to help you while we continue to help Jamaica.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Mr. Chairman.
Dr. Pickersgill?
Yes. With respect to sanctions, under the Ports Management and Security Regulations, the Port Authority issues IDs to stakeholders. Persons coming on the port, we issue IDs to approved entities, approved truckers, exporters, importers, etc. Under that regulation, the Port Authority also has a right to withdraw identification. And usually this withdrawal is concerned not only with safety, security, but also aspects of corruption. With respect, and we have been trying to broaden it to employees in the industry. We have encountered, and Mr. Stevenson can tell you, not only encountered, but has been exposed to litigation and fines. Because, as the speaker before said, you have to, when you go very legalistic, you have to prove things not beyond a reasonable doubt, but the balance of probability. You have to have all the evidence, all your ducks in a row. We are hobbled by the informer for dead, so the information, although persons will whisper, they will not come up front. So we have a provision in the Act where we reserve the right at our discretion to take that ID. And that has been applied where we have gotten information from our trusted partners overseas that you do not wish to go into the court of law and said, well, the DEA, the FBI, etc. So, in fact, in the recent past, we have taken IDs from about 19 persons, Mr. Stevenson, and it just took one person to go to the court to say that his right was infringed. He did not have the right to a hearing, etc., etc. There were two persons, actually. The first person filed suit against the Port Authority, and we contended in court successfully that we have certain information that we considered confidential as it affects the security and safety of the nation. Normally, courts may say that that was not a good defense. However, the judge found that if there was an issue of confidentiality and information, then the claimant needed to go to the Access to Information Tribunal to try to get that information. And therefore, the claimant didn't, that went away. The other persons, it was stated that whilst the Port Authority may have that right to take away the ID, the employer terminal had no such right to relieve them of their employment. And therefore, Kingston Wharves is on the hook. We are now trying to strengthen that regulation. Persons on the port are long-standing employees, and therefore some have contracts over time. We've started to say all new contracts must have a provision to say the employee refers that the Port Authority has a right to take this ID, and once the ID is taken, then they are agreeing that their employment also ceases. With respect to the other persons, we continue to rely on trusted partners locally and internally to tell us what is happening, and once we have reasonable cause to believe that corruption or threat to safety exists, then we will exercise the right to take the ID, which essentially, if somebody is brave enough to do the crime, then they have to take the penalty of having their employment and the practice of their trade terminated.
Thank you, Dr. Pickersgill. We'll come back to the panel. Hold on to that thought, Ms. Edwards. We have had two gentlemen on the floor standing a bit, and I'm not sure how sturdy the legs are. So we want to allow them to ask the questions, and then the panelists may chime in on a previous question later on if they so desire. Mr. Siebert Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Age before seniority, Constant. My name is Siebert Mitchell from the Tax Policy Division, Ministry of Finance. And my question is geared to the external members of the panel. It is said that if there are no givers, there can be no takers. We heard earlier on that corruption is a $3 trillion industry. So it simply means that in order to deal effectively with this scourge, this thing which is systematic, we have to take a holistic approach. Now, we have started on that trek whereby it is manifest that there is some collaboration between the sector and the Jamaica Customs Agency, right? Just by your being here. But my question is whether there is any contemplation of the entire sector forming whether a working group or a committee to deal with important issues, such as issues of corruption, because we are not going to effectively treat with those persons in the private sector who seek to corrupt public officials. We're not going to be able to deal them effectively unless we come together as a broad group, share ideas, work together, look at what happens in another man's shop, and provide advice for each other. So I'm throwing that out. It is thought-provoking, I know, but I think it is worth knowing what the contemplation is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Any member of the panel wish to comment on that? Mr. Allen?
I may, mainly because you mentioned private sector. There's no doubt that the time to point finger is far gone. We all know that there's that 46% or more of us, either by perception, real or perceived, that are either involved with or know of persons in corruption. So the fix is what we're looking at. I think the idea is noble, but critically though, for any member of the private sector to offer or take a corrupt practice, introduce a corrupt practice to any member of custom or anybody else, that person would have to be willing. So we're not going there in respect to the to and fro. Again, I repeat, we are not short of things on the books. We are not short of policies, whether from government to private sector. And let me not take the opportunity and big up custom, because they have worked wonders over the last couple of years in respect to putting systems in place. And I'm saying that we're talking about the private sector. But quite frankly, it comes back to the moral compass of each of us. With all the other stuff that we're doing. Dishonesty going to kill us. Somebody mentioned the culture. The good news is that customers said, and I heard from the commissioner herself, that they intend to look at another step in the program as one of the way forward to see if we now can expand what we're doing here today into other sectors of the society. And we have committed, and I on behalf of the membership have committed, that we are also prepared to then introduce, as a part of our discussion, to become certified under the AOE program, to be able to have the benefit and privilege that we enjoy, the subject of corruption. Not afraid to face up to it. Because if we tell another man what happened to himself and how his breath smell, I have to check on my own. And that's where the subject of discussion need to be. Don't let me spell it out. The data is there for all to see. How many of us in the room? 40% or more of us could be, including me, involved in corruption. Let us not skip around it. So time for that kind of talk is done. I was a little reluctant coming here after being invited, because I'm really just a little tired of the talk shop. But you know why I was very encouraged to come and happy to come? Under the leadership of this commissioner. I've seen tangible efforts to fix the problem, which is why I am here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Mr. Stevenson.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to go back to the previous point. One of the problems we as employers have in dealing with this matter and our employees is that the courts and the IDT view these matters very differently, and so it makes it very, very difficult for us. And because there's always collusion. We might have 10,000 containers on the port at any one time. How would a man on the street know that this particular one is going to Trinidad? There's no way he can know. Only people who have access to our system can tell that. But when you have information which may not be sufficient to make an arrest, then nothing happens. Because if you try, as Carol said, we're going to either end up in court or IDT, one or the other. And the IDT is going to rule in favor of the employee. So it's a very difficult matter. Also, another area where we have a major problem, how often when there is a find either on a ship or in one of the warehouses, all that seems to happen is that everybody calls CVM and TVJ. And we make a big deal on the 7 o'clock news. And then what happens after? We have instances where some of our own employees were caught on CCTV with packages coming off a ship. The security at the gate were alerted, and packages were found which turned out to contain cocaine. They were arrested, and before you know it, they were freed. The only person who suffered was the company because the police seized the vehicle. And by the time we were able to get it back, it had rotted down at Newport West police station. So when people believe that they have a better than even chance to get away, how are we going to stop the smuggling? It is not very apparent to me that when these issues, when these situations arise, that there's any meaningful effort to prosecute the case. There was one last year in one of the warehouses where substantial amount of guns and ammunition were found. And somebody actually came to clear the shipment. And everybody knew when the person came that guns were in there. Nothing happened. And the person just walked out. So we have a real challenge there dealing with some of these issues. And I'm not quite sure what is the solution, but I think it's worthwhile venting that one.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Mr. Moran?
I hope the lady's not leaving because of me. All right. Good afternoon, colleagues. All right, I want to, first of all, Cranston Morgan here from Revenue Protection Division. I want to address a few issues that have been brought up. I think the gentleman over there spoke about ethics or teaching integrity in schools. Not hearing me? Sorry about that. Right, the gentleman spoke about ethics in schools. I just want to bring it to the attention of everyone here that the RPD has, in fact, started discussions with the Ministry of Education in terms of teaching ethics in schools or presenting on ethics in schools. It's something that we need to develop on further. Also want to touch on something Mr. Gonzalez said in his introductory remarks, speaking about corruption being a cultural phenomenon. That is the unfortunate truth. But how do we address it? We can address it from the schools, but we also need to, I think, address it from issue of the influencers in society. So politicians, media, etc. We need to bring them on board, and they need to set the tone. Especially those at the top, the politicians need to set the tone so that society will understand that what is expected of them. Yes? And it's important because Jamaica is a signatory to the United Nations, and the United Nations has a set of goals, sustainable development goals. And the Sustainable Development Goal 16 says to promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. The targets, two of those targets, tie into exactly what we're saying here. Target 16.5 says to substantially reduce corruption and bribery in all its forms, and 16.6 says to develop effective, accountable, and transparent institutions at all levels. So now, corruption is not just something at customs or, in the shipping industry. It is a national issue. It is something that affects how we are perceived abroad. It affects grant funding. It affects opportunities for businesses here. If Jamaica gets a reputation of being a very corrupt place, it's going to be harder for Jamaican businesses to have linkages with businesses abroad. And I think we need to ensure that the greater population understands how sometimes these what we consider small acts of corruption. We know there is no small act of corruption, but what some people consider small acts of corruption, how they feed into a wider national position. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Ladies and gentlemen, before we come to the other question from the floor, there is a question online that has been sitting with me for a while, and Mr. Stevenson, you just spoke, but this question is directed at Kingston Wharves Limited. And if I don't ask it, I'll hear that I didn't. The question is the issue regarding port/warehouse workers who request favors or money from especially domestic importers. The viewer online is asking what is being done to address this issue by KWL. And I dare say that this is not an issue that is unique to KWL, but you're on the panel, so you may be in a position to address this question.
All our employees are aware that that is strictly forbidden, and we have signs there in the warehouses. They have been told this. And where we find this, because everything is monitored on CCTV, that individual is immediately dismissed.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. A question from the floor?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gregory Farquhar, Director of Revenue Investigation, acting at RPD. All right, I've heard the different remarks and comments earlier, but my concern is how are people treated? And when I say people, I refer to staff, whether it be within customs or any other entities, stakeholders, who are alleged to be involved in corruption or corrupt activities. The question why I ask it is on the basis that sometimes when I am aware over years now, over time, being in investigation, that sometimes a senior officer or manager within your department, your entity, calls in that individual who is alleged to be involved or was caught in a corrupt act, asks them to give an account, and allows that person, is like a tap on the wrist, to go out there or to resign and to find themselves in another entity. For example, I use it to ship me and I use Mailpack. So the person might have been found at ship me to have done something wrong. Their service was terminated, but because it is not known to Mailpack, they end up at Mailpack and is given that opportunity again to perpetrate the same kind of act. Is there any form of database or any communication between the stakeholders that would flag these individuals? So notwithstanding legally, there's no conviction, right? I understand that quite well. There's nothing that would put the evidence there to have them convicted because they may not find the witnesses coming forward. So the person does not have a conviction and therefore is allowed to move on into the entity and to perpetrate the crime all over again. How are they treated?
I want to...
Thank you for your question.
Thank you. I want to comment on that because it is actually an excellent point that you raised. I remember some time ago an employee was dismissed and another player in the market would have said to me, how comes you send your thief in worker to me? I mean, they recruited them and the same experience they would have, and before you know it, the person was terminated from that other entity. And before you know it, the person had on a port ID. And so the point is very relevant, and I'm not aware of any structure that is in place at the moment, but certainly it is something that ought to be established, and we should communicate with each other. Because unknowing to the other employer, that person could be moving from stage to stage along the chain. And so I'm happy you raised the point, and some of the stakeholders are here and my partners in business, and so that will be discussed in short order.
Is there another member of the panel who wish to address that?
Yes, Chairman.
Mr. Stevenson, and then we take Mr. Okay, all the panelists down the end, and then we'll come back to Ms. Edwards in the middle.
Between the major players and the port, we have informal systems of speaking to each other. So if Mark worked at KFTL and is leaving and wanted to come to Kingston Wharves, we would communicate, and therefore we would, even if he may not have been convicted for anything, or if there are suspicions, we would be aware and therefore would be in a position to determine whether or not we employ that person. But another problem we have is the fact that the porter ID requires that you do not have a police record. And very often you have people who may not have been arrested or convicted, but who may have done a lot of things in various places. And you won't know until you have employed them, unfortunately.
Very excellent. I mean, that's a brilliant question you have there, and it's something that has weighed on my mind quite a bit because, you know, what you find right now in our industry, it's a growing industry. You find that the competitors out there are not necessarily looking to do their own thing. You have a lot of competitors entering the market that they want to come in, they want to follow, they want a quick way to the top, they're not willing to go the extra mile, do it yourself. Our general policy is we don't hire anybody from any other courier. If you're coming from a courier, we're not going to take you. We train our people from scratch, put them in the function. I mean, we'll take, for example, somebody from a custom brokerage because that's not exactly what we do, but we do not hire anybody from another courier. Now, there may be instances, like the other panelists have said, that, you know, somebody gets let go or asked to resign, and a week later they're at another courier. It is that courier's responsibility, knowing that that person is coming from another courier, to ask. And if the courier's intention is not above board, because a lot of people may want to know, oh, I want to know what ShipMe is doing. I want to know what Mailpack is doing. Let me go and hire this person. Let me ask them a lot of questions, find out the inner workings of those companies so that I can replicate. To me, from where I stand, that is what is happening now. So there's no communication. Like Mark said, and another panelist said, it used to be a case where people would approach you and say, hey, what do you think about this person? Nowadays, they just hire, you see them over there next week, you know you had an issue, maybe because the government quite a bit of money, and then you hold your head because you go over to the other warehouse and the person is working there. There's no mechanism right now in place, but that is something that definitely needs to be tabled. And I mean, even for that ex-employee, that person should have a say. But at the same time, something needs to be done about that. So that's a very good question that you raised.
Thank you, Mr. Clark.
All right,
Mrs. Burke-Green.
Yes, thank you. Well, as the other panelists said, one of the things that we have to do is to do a reference. The problem with that, however, sometimes when you do a reference, the person that you are asked to contact for the reference or you're able to contact will not give you the correct information. In our industry, generally, we speak to each other. We're competitors, but we do have a relationship. So we do speak to each other to get references. Another thing that I would like to see, however, is that an improvement in our court system. Because in many of these cases, I think these people should go to court and go to prison if necessary. But some of the times we can't be bothered because a charge is brought, and then 2-3 years down the line, you're still going to court. And the time that is going to take me to go to court for 3 years, for somebody who maybe stole 100,000 or 200,000, that time that I had spent going to court, it will multiply. I could earn more. So we need to have an improvement in our court system. and we will have more of these cases going to court.
Thank you, Mrs. Burke-Green. We'll hear from Ms. Edwards. Then we'll go to Ms. Allen. We're in the final minutes of this panel discussion, and so we'll take Ms. Edwards, we'll take Ms. Allen. There is a comment from a viewer online, and then we'll just have final comments from the panelists to wrap up this panel discussion. Ms. Edwards?
Thank you. We, as Ms. indicated, we need to be going to court more with respect to these matters. We need to be pursuing convictions. And while it is true that we have many laws on the book, in how many instances are we actually implementing the various provisions? For example, we have the Protected Disclosures Act of 2011, which is commonly referred to as our whistleblower legislation. The Act mandates that both public and private sector entities put in place whistleblowing mechanisms. And it means that in your organizations, you must identify an individual to whom employees can make confidential disclosures. Because oftentimes, employees know what their colleagues are doing. They have seen things. And they are in a position to give you the type of information that will allow us to pursue successful prosecutions. But they're afraid. They're afraid that if they give you the information, it will not be treated in a confidential manner. You indicate it will be misused. They're afraid that if they make a disclosure, they'll have the reputation as informer, that they will be terminated. And all of this is what the legislation is designed to prevent. It protects the employee who has made a disclosure from termination. It mandates that the information be kept confidential. So we need to ensure that those mechanisms are in place in our respective organizations. So we must look internally, not just among the panelists, but all of us, and ensure that those mechanisms are in place so that we can get the information that is necessary, hand it over to the police, and allow the prosecutions to be pursued.
Thank you, Ms. Edwards. Ms. Allen, just allow me a minute. Dr. Pickersgill wanted to chime in on this issue. The Port Authority has a very... Okay, go ahead, Ms. Allen, and then Dr. Pickersgill will come in after.
All right, thanks again, and I'll make this one brief. Two things. The first with regards to hiring and how employees move across entities or stakeholders, right? We talked about systems, right? I'm an IT person, I'm a technology person, so I'm going to leverage that in helping resolving the issue here. If we understand collaboration and holistic solution problem solving, you'll realize that any employee or any party who works within the framework of import-export should have a standardized identification that is pooled in one system, that whether you work with ShipMe, whether you work with MailPack, whether you are a member of the JCA, whether you work with the AOE, that you are listed, ID'd, identified, and have a reference background that is poolable, accessible, because we are transparent and we're accountable. I think if we talk about information sharing and information exchange, that premise and basis helps to negate anything else. One of the problems you'll have with whistleblowing, while it's a good thing to put in place, it's a reactive system. We talk about this in IT, proactive solution solving versus reacting, which is now after you've had the issue, you're trying to fix things. If you give persons the ability to be trustworthy in the first instance, then when they know they're in a system, it's a little bit harder. It's like you have God's eyes watching you. We talk about the Jamaica eye. You can have the custom eye. If you are all there already, you know you're being somewhat watched, even by yourself. That's where the accountability starts, right? And then you have continuity because you know that wherever you are, there you are. No matter where you go, you follow yourself, right? So your own integrity follows you where you go. There is no need for reference checks because you're in the system, and whatever you do is within that system. Another thing I'd like to mention is the hiring, and I mentioned this earlier, or it was raised earlier. We talked about confidentiality and trust, and hiring and culture. change management and adoption is important for any new program or system being put in place, whether it's where you're onboarding employees, training them up, whatever it is that you're doing, whether it's systems or resources or programs or associations, whether you're going out into town hall meetings or whatever else it is, constant change management is a requirement. And I would say to you, my question to you is, and I think you've mentioned it, with the committees you're putting in board, the integrity and the values commissions and all of these things, I think we just need to make sure that the systems that are being put in place are properly manned and that there's integration and collaboration between them. So it's not necessarily a question I'm putting forward, but just to maybe give a little bit of a solution to the issue you raised. Yeah?
Thank you, Ms. Allen. I appreciate the comment. Ladies and gentlemen, as I told you, we're in the final minutes of this panel discussion. And I'm going to take I'll leave the comment online for last because I think it's a fitting way to end. So what I'll do at this time, starting from my extreme left, is that we'll take closing remarks or comments from the panelists. By no means the discussion is complete. It's not. What we have done today is that we have continued essentially a discussion that has been started a while back. And so the challenge is some of the things that would have come out of today's discussion is to how do we build on those, how do we continue the dialogue. But we'll start from the far end of the table, and we'll take very, very brief final comment from the panelists. Thank you.
We had a very interesting discussion today. Certainly from the courier sector, we still have a lot of work to do on our end. And I know that myself and Mark are committed to improving the courier sector. So we definitely will be meeting to discuss some of the issues and look at some of the solutions that were presented to us here today. Thank you guys very much for having us. And it was my pleasure being here.
Thank you. It was a pleasure being here also. Just to end, though, is that the Custom Brokers and Freight Forwarders Association of Jamaica is always ready and always working, especially with customs, to improve our processes, which generally assist in the project, the aim that we're here today. And that's really the short-term fix. And the long-term fix is what Jocelyn said. And I agree is that we need to seek to change our young people so that our leaders of tomorrow will do better than we're doing today.
This was really a useful exercise. And perhaps what we should consider is doing it more often. And that would probably ensure that some of the very good suggestions that have come from the floor are implemented. At least when we meet regularly, then we would have to respond to whether or not we have done any of the things that have been suggested. So, Madam Commissioner, I would suggest we try and do this quarterly.
Thank you very much. It was indeed a useful forum. And I just want to add something in closing. In terms of all our processes that we're putting together, what we've discussed here and all, and everything in terms of combating corruption. Another way that I would want us to also look at it is to make it virtually impossible for persons in this sector to engage in corruption. And by that I'm saying, let us look at the process, make it seamless. One, another thing which I know that it might be at another level other than this room, is for us to look at the tax rate. The cost of doing business at times, though there's another aspect of integrity. For example, if you look at a cell phone, it is something that persons would easily want to conceal and to import. Months or years ago, the duty was removed, and so the GCT went to 25%. Years after, the duty was reimposed, the GCT still remained at 25%. those are little things. When we ignore at times the small things, look at the broad picture, and we're not realizing what will breathe the corruption and what would influence persons to cheat the system. And if we can tackle those things, the process, the rules, the procedures, make it very simple, educate the population on what is required. A lot of times when persons engage in corrupt activity, it is simple because they don't know. And we know that the cost of corruption is more than if you would abide by the rule. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This is indeed a continuation of a very long beginning. We have been having beginning discussions for quite a long time. And usually we have to take scissors and mercifully cut these things. We are beginning, we should see to middling, implementation, and conclusion, successful or otherwise, and for us to transparently say, well, these are the things we have tried, and these are the things we have achieved, and these are the things we are failing in, and we are either going to improve the ones we are failing or find another way to deal with it. This was indeed a very productive morning. It was a very, we had good discussions, but we can say it can be productive, and since customs is leading the way, perhaps what we need to do at the end, and it has been said, is to have a kind of aid memoir. Whilst I may subscribe to the quarterly meetings, for this one, what we should do, some good suggestions have been made, that at least we put all the suggestions together, and we have an action column, and we say, this is the day the suggestion has been made. In 2 months' time or a month's time, what have we been able to achieve? What are we working at? You know, things in progress, or things that we can or cannot achieve, or things we need assistance in achieving. But I think we should go from here. Thank you very much.
The discussions have emphasized that customs laws that are clear and transparent and easy to understand is a key step in helping us to deal with corruption. We have made some strides with respect to the modern legislation through partnership with you, our stakeholders. We're continuing the process, and we look forward to your continued assistance. Robust, frank, open discussions on all matters so that we can indeed have the modern customs laws that we all deserve.
The Jamaica Customs Agency is truly blessed to have you here sharing in this moment with us. And as Kofi says, gratitude is a must. And for that, I am very thankful. But I also want to share that, you know, I don't think it was mentioned, it is in your pamphlets, that we also have a JCA Anti-Corruption and Ethics Committee, and some of the members of that committee are here today. We have a member from RPD, which is the commissioner. We have Mitzi, that is on the committee, and that committee is chaired by the Mr. Sykes from the Financial Investigation Department or Division. But that committee also has on board private sector. That is the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce. We also have the TAJ and other bodies on that to help us in reviewing our strategies, our measures, our policies, and to give us advice and recommendation so that we can continue to improve. Having said that, it is important also that as an entity of government that is driven by the mandate of trade facilitation, border protection, and of course revenue collection, we do that anchored by our core values, what we call CAPIT. And I'm sure our CAPIT ambassador, Mr. Sean, is down there, and it's about customer focus, accountability. Where are my team members in guiding this, right? Professionalism, integrity, and transparency. And it's not about talk. It's not about a bag of mouth. It's about action. It's about driving within our team members to live those core values and to hold them accountable to what we are about in serving this island that we call Jamaica. We want to drive out cultural inertia, people inertia, organization inertia, and country inertia. Rise up, people, and get the effort in. And I ask you to continue to help us to do the best we can for you.
After that, Commissioner, for me, it's removing the inefficiencies. And so far, we are proud as Jamaica Customs Agency that we are removing efficiencies, because it's inefficiencies that causes corruption. As a member of this panel and as a member of the team, I commit myself to ensure there are greater efficiencies so that we will ensure there is the roots of corruption are broken. Thank you.
And after all of that, there is not much left to say, right? You'll agree. But my parting charge to you all, including myself, is for us to ask ourselves, what is integrity? And when you find a definition for what is integrity, I want you to examine yourselves, including myself, examine our actions in light of that definition, and see what it is that we need to change about ourselves so that we can improve our own integrity and the integrity of the space that we're operating in. And that is my simple charge. I think if we start there, then we can start to see changes, and we'll start to see integrity strengthening and improving in our operating spaces. Thank you.
After all that, what am I left to say? Except to say, 5 to 10 years ago, I was doing like what Bush would say, it's not an easy road. It wasn't an easy road before AOE. And let me say, so the public can understand the benefit of this program. Gratitude is no a must, because I have to give thanks to Custom and the AOE team in particular. Because we are getting our containers, I want to be specific, with such urgency and speed that cause our business to grow enormously. We could not have supplied our customer with the kind of urgency that we are doing now 5, 6, 7 years ago. So I want to say that categorically. But I want to close my closing remarks, ladies and gentlemen, and come back to where I started. If you see corruption and don't speak about corruption or do something about corruption, it just may be you're corrupted. We thought we are adults here. And corruption is not a nice word. It's not something we need to come here and sit down and talk about as if we're speaking about bread and butter, even though it's a bread and butter issue. We know we have a problem. However, again, I don't want to give a plug for custom every time, but I want to see every entity doing what they are doing, since other persons elsewhere appear not to be doing it. And I won't get into the politics of that. Because the issue we have, when one side decides that this is appropriate to fix corruption, the other side tear it down because no one, the other side get the credit. And we end up in a situation where we confuse about a subject named corruption. It's nonsense. I am telling you this, we are not confused. We know exactly what it is. And we're happy to know that the system is of such that we don't need to call nobody and bribe nobody. Not that we used to do it necessarily. But there's another thing quickly before I close. Let us join the line, no man. Let us wait our turn, no man. Sometimes because we want to get ahead of the next man, you pay anything it takes to get ahead. On the flip side, those in customer authority, stop taking the calls, no man. I know Custom Commissioner very well. Ask her if I ever call her yet on any personal matter, business or otherwise, in front of me or behind me. Because it's a discipline. You have contacts, you have links. The negative links don't, Commissioner. So you use your links to get ahead of the next man. It is corrupt. And what the next man do in turn? Find somebody internally to pay to counteract that link, and they continue. So, ladies and gentlemen, I close by saying it comes back to personal responsibility. Let us leave here. I commit on behalf of the AOA and those of us in the private sector who have been so certified to include as a start the issue of corruption in our training agenda, just like we do anti-terrorism and all the other things that the customer and the AOA have asked us to do. With that, I want to thank you all and thank our membership if any of you are here. I'm really very, very grateful to have been here, and thank you very much.
Thank you. The vote of thanks is not my job, but thank you, panelists, for giving your closing remarks. And I say, as a member of the customs team, that we are absolutely proud of the Authorized Economic Operator Program. We are absolutely proud of that program. Ladies and gentlemen, I promise you that I'll close out the panel discussion with a comment from our online viewer, and this one is from Ahmed Bachun. I hope I got that pronunciation correct, on Facebook. And he says, as an expert for the World Customs Organization in the field of anti-corruption, I had personally witnessed Jamaica Customs Agency commitment and its leadership role in the advancement of integrity and the fight against corruption amongst its staff and stakeholders. Today, Anti-Corruption Forum is another step forward in the fight against corruption. Great initiative. Acknowledge the problem and bring all stakeholders in the supply chain under one roof to find solutions to this scourge is among one of the best practices to tackle corruption effectively. Hats off. And that's a fitting way to end the panel discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, the day has been well spent, and so I will now invite Mr. Devon Manahan. You know, earlier I was wondering why Durvandale got two responsibility today, because I was seeing other things. I'll invite Mr. Devon Manahan to do the vote of thanks.
Mr. Master of Ceremony, I want to thank you for the name change. At this age, I have to go do a deep hole. But ladies and gentlemen, it was good for us to be here. I must say that the panel is a very large panel, but it serves its purpose. I think we have achieved what we have set out to achieve. And as the commissioner has mentioned, that corruption is a national issue. And I must tell you, for those who know me very well, I say it like it is. I have been here for quite a while, in customs. And I must tell you that since we have this commissioner, Velma Ricketts-Walker, there has been a vast improvement. We are getting where we want to reach. If it was not so, I would not have said it. But she has invested a lot of time into the Internal Affairs Unit, headed by Ms. Tamika Goldburn. We have a very, I must say, competent, calm, intelligent team of investigators, and also the support team within that unit. I have to work with them from time to time, and I can tell you that my interaction so far is a pleasant one. And I always encourage my staff not to be fearful, because, once upon a time, we used to not like investigators, I think it still happens, but we are getting there where we understand their role. They are also human beings. They have a role to play. And I think when you cooperate with them, It's better for you and it's better for them. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, as I said, it was good for us to be here. Mr. Rocky Allen, let me tell you something. In 2009, when we decided that we were going to roll out this AO program, I was one of them who had the task to go around from unit to unit and also to the business places to introduce this program. Now, as a Naomi looking, I remember when I went to Val Branch, Naomi's question to me was, can that happen? She was one of them, like myself, who thought these dry bones couldn't live. And I'm surprised, I'm being totally honest with you. I am surprised that today it is a reality and is one of the programs that I support a lot because I sit on the AO committee, and I'm still in shock that this program is really progressing the way that it is progressing today. So, looking at that program, sir, it tells me that we can eliminate corruption. If that program can work, it simply means that, because remember, the thing is that I thought it couldn't happen. So the way how we look at corruption now and say, boy, it can't happen, it can happen. It's gonna take a collaborative effort for us to get rid of this scourge. Now, some of us view corruption as a little brown envelope. You give a man a little brown envelope. It is much, much bigger than a little brown envelope. I always tell my staff that, listen, if you come to work 8:30 and you come 9 and put 8:30, it is corruption. It starts there. It has to start somewhere, for it to get big. You see what I'm saying? And this is a topic that I always want a forum where we can discuss certain things, because as I said, I am a realist. And for those who know me, know that I am a realist. We go to work as custom officers and you walk with your cell phone. People call your cell phone, you call yourself. It's people call you for help. It's people that reach out to you. So as Janice said, I don't want to say the wrong Janice, but anyone said that if you declare the correct value, if you declare the right thing, you want to ask for no help. You want to call me or I call my officer them. As long as you declare the right thing and the onus is on you to prove your transaction value. Say, this is what me, and I know. If you are like me who say it's dollar me pay for it, I may not pay nothing more. And stick to your dollar because it's dollar you pay. I wouldn't have no reason to walk and look nobody if he help me. So, Mr. Allen, join the line. Wait your turn. Your time will come. Yeah, you will be at the front of the line at some point. So, ladies and gentlemen, I have said my little bit, but the vote of thanks is what is of vital importance, which I have not yet touched. Which I was called upon to do. I will not mention the members of the panel by name, but I want to thank you all very much. Your input and your insight of the whole topic is well received. I'm sure that for those who are here and those who are listening via the internet or otherwise have learned something new, and I know that we will continue as an agency. I know because we have a commissioner who has a vision where taking us from one place in terms of where we were in terms of corruption and where we want to see it eliminated totally into our working space. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here, and we look forward to having another function of this nature with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Manahan. And ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to have had you here at the Jamaica Customs Agency Anti-Corruption Panel Discussion for 2019. The suggestion was made to do this more often. We'll see about that, but at least we can guarantee next year there will be some form, whether a forum or panel discussion or whatever creative idea the wonderful team at Internal Affairs will come up with, so that we can continue the dialogue and discussion and the work as far as integrity is concerned. And I will end with the word integrity, not corruption. I'll end with the word integrity. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.